flatten the hierarchy. And that's a difficult thing. And it might sound like it doesn't fit with the topic of leadership. So you need to flatten it in many, many aspects. The concept, it needs to be collaborative. Leadership, as Dave said, starts with the top, but it's defined by all. So flattening the hierarchy, there's all sorts of ways you can do that. Things that I've seen that may have been regular on many other teams, and you may be on your team, not saying it's wrong, just asking you maybe to reconsider. Things like tasks. So many teams, older teams, will have rookie tasks. So when you have a rookie task, I understand the concept is to, ingratiate some sort of servitude, and that you can feel that you're part of something. But I would suggest maybe that flattening of the hierarchy really limits any leadership potential. So, and if you don't flatten your hierarchy in your organization for many issues, it has the potential to railroad any sort of thing that you're doing in terms of leadership. Now, last week, Dave talked about buy-in, and many of you use the phrase of buy-in. I like a different phrase completely, and that is more of a concept of they're not buying in, they've invented it, they've described it, they've defined it. So when you talk about culture, instead of you defining it with some players' help, the concept is that leaders and your teams can define that. So the concept changes way more from just simple buy-in, which I would phrase that, it sounds simple, but simple buy-in, and rather than something that inundates and it's throughout the organization and it's within the whole part. It also makes it much easier then, when you flatten the hierarchy, is that you understand the importance of roles. Dave Wapnuck also talked last week about roles and the importance of role clarity and role acceptance. When you get to a spot, when you flatten the hierarchy, you flatten the organization that you have, roles then become fluid at different times. And Dave also spoke about this last week, is that sometimes you're going to lead and sometimes you're going to follow. I would argue the coach needs to be in the same thing, as do staff. Sometimes you need to follow your team, and this could be, depending on levels, could be many different ages. But if the coach is then seen as a role in the team, where leadership is also important, that role is really important there. Ian, I'm going to stop a little bit because I'm hoping that this generated a few questions or even comments. If you want to contradict as well, I love that. Please, if you question something, it's the greatest way for me to help myself learn.
Okay, Neil, we do have one question. How do you flatten the hierarchy when you have big personalities in your locker room, and how might that affect those big personalities?
Oh, great question. In a couple more slides, I will actually delve right into I'm a lot nicer instead of big personalities, and I'll call them loudmouths, and we'll talk about roles of those leaders. But I'll give you a little hint as we get going. It's basically you need to utilize those and understand where their power and their strength can actually help your organization rather than hinder it. So I will touch more on that. Yeah. Any others?
Yeah. What are checkpoints for coaches to ensure the hierarchy is flattened? And then how can you catch it in the moment?
Oh, great. Yeah. So as we go on a little bit further as well, that's great. It's going to be, you need to be intentional about it. And that's actually one of the areas is intentional and daily. And that you need to actually, the way to measure it is daily check-ins. And that's check-ins with individuals, with yourself, and we'll get into reflection. Yeah, and I will get into that. I will answer that a little bit more clearly
Okay.
later.
We do have another one as well. How do you continue to manage moving forward with a very collaborative environment, and can this lead to inefficiencies?
Yeah, also another great question. Yeah, it can be inefficient. It can also be, there is a potential for danger as well in terms of the same sort of question about loud personalities. People who you have to pick your leaders. So it can be derailed, but it takes effort, and that effort is pretty consistent. Okay, that's awesome. You guys are asking questions. I'm good. Wow, I'm actually going to get to some of these things. This is going to be good. I'm going to move to the next one, Ian. So I'm not sure how this is going to work, but here, the next phrase, and it relates to the last question, is an intentional. Again, I'm struggling with technology, but I do have a video that I'm hoping works. And basically, as you're watching, you may have to watch some of the subtitles in this. It's Italian. And here's the phrase, basically, is that everything can be useful or everyone can be useful. It's just how you intend to use the tools around you. So bear with me as I... Okay, let's see if this works. Ian, just yell if it's not working. Here we go.
Scusi, buon uomo. Mi sa dire l'ora, per favore?
We have sound but no video.
You have no video. Dang.
Ma è sicuro?
Okay. Well, did you all understand the Italian? Not. That the technology didn't work. So here's the gist of it. And I apologize if anybody's offended by the graphic nature of my description. Basically, it's a guy riding in the Italian countryside, and he stops by the road where there's a farmer sleeping by a goat. And he asks him, what time is it? And the old guy reaches over and reaches between the goat's legs, and he moves the testicles of the goat, and he tells the guy the time. The guy moves on into town. He comes back, sees the same farmer sitting by the side. He asks again, what time is it, sir? Gentleman again reaches over, moves the testicles of the goat, and tells him the time again. And the guy scratches his head and this is like, how do you know that? And just by touching the goat's testicles. And the answer back is he moves it, and you see the picture where he's actually moving the testicles in order to see what the clock says in town. I encourage you to look that up. That one always makes me crack up. Here's intentional, and I do have a goat there. Help the right people lead. So this gets back to that other question before about how do you actually get there? You have to be intentional. Leadership is not just willy-nilly, and it doesn't just happen. If it just happens, you're only going to get the consequence. It could be good or bad, but you can't actually control that consequence. So you have to be really mindful of this. It is, as we said, relationships are the bedrock. And if you know your people, then this becomes a little bit easier. The phrase, and he asked about loud people, don't cut them. Don't cut them. Don't cut the loud mouth. Again, sorry if I apologize if anybody is offended by that term. But those sort of people often can help you. They're strong personalities, and you need to understand the power of informal leaders. Some coaches will make the mistake of naming captains, and they will work only with those captains. Those captains are not necessarily the team leaders. There's many informal leaders. They might not want to be the captain, but they might have control of your change room. They might have control of your group off the court, off the field, off the ice, wherever you are. So you need to make sure you understand who those people are, and you need to kind of pick the right spots and include them. As soon as you don't include them, you're likely into lots of issues and lots of trouble. Last week as well, I think there was a question about the 80-20 principle. So I don't know, remember if we answered, but so basically the 80-20 principle is the concept that effective coaches need to put effort, 80% of their effort, into 20% of the players. For my formula for rugby, for my team, I have roughly 36 players. I do spend more time and effort with the leaders. So mine, it's not quite 80-20, maybe 90 or 80-10 or something like that. But we do have a group of anywhere between 3 and 6 leaders. I typically try to make it a little bit more fluid. I do name captains. I have in the past not always named captains, but we've done that as well. And so the 80-20 is really important. You can't cut out all players, and you can't isolate yourself from the team. But by utilizing your attention on 10% or 20%, and focusing your efforts on fostering leadership really intentionally with that small group, but also looking for examples of where you could get it wider, where you can involve everybody. Things that work. So you need to understand as well that the difference of when to lead, when to allow players to lead, and when not to allow players to lead. So there's certain things, and depending on your level and yourself, you might have some non-negotiables. You are not talking about a certain area. You really have to, don't go look for the leadership if you're not willing to follow it. If you're afraid of what they're going to actually say or do or decide, you can't entrust them, because it's just piecemeal then, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So many times there's some transactional things. Obviously, sometimes the difference between transactional and transformational with coaching, many coaches would like to say they're transformational, but I have transactional. Sometimes you just need to have things that are done. This is the way we're going to do it. We're not commenting. And to be honest, there's no need for leadership at this time. I'm going to tell you exactly how it's done. So that's quite, I see that quite different. And again, purposeful, and only at certain times. It also helps if players have chances to lead, that players develop a self-autonomy that is not blind trust. When athletes have blind trust in coaches, the potential for harm to the athlete is immense. It also, I would argue, has, on the performance side, you have the potential of weakening or loosening down the line. You might win a lot of regular season things. You're not going to get that extra 2% in performance that you need in order to win championships or build really strong programs. And final comment on this before I look for questions is increased athlete leadership is not abdication of leadership by the coach. It's purposeful, it's intentional, it's designed. We know when it is, we try to foster it, we build it, we do all of those things. So it's not just saying the coach doesn't want to do this job. You look at the things and the tasks and the relationships and the synergies in teams that you could share. So I'm going to stop there for a little bit, Ian, and see if there's some questions on the second one, which is intentional. No questions, Ian?
No, but maybe just check your chat and make sure there's nothing that came in privately.
Sure. Okay. This needs to be daily and consistent. So it fits with the last slide of being intentional. These are some examples of ways that you can build leadership, and you can look for leaders all sorts of ways. Don't just always go to your team leadership group or your captains and assistant captains. And some of these are scary. Practice planning. I'm going to have a separate section on game modeling. I'll give you the example of what we did this year with Horns Rugby on game modeling. So practice planning. You should provide lots of leadership opportunity for athletes to give you input on how your practice went. I strongly believe coaches should be communicating what's going to go on in practice, and those sorts of things need to be built with players. Now, even at lower levels, you can do those sorts of things. You can ask younger kids what sort of things. Now, again, you have to have an eye on what's going to be useful information, and where obviously adult participants can give you a way better idea, but the practice planning can really help. Again, it's leadership, and sometimes just informing your decision can be seen as leadership. Meetings, all sorts of things you can do there. Social activities. This is a great opportunity for some of those players who might not be your star players. They might not be the players getting all your court time or ice time or field time or the player that scores the most. But there's lots of activities that those players may feel that they want to contribute to the organization. And so that's another good thing. I strongly believe all players need to be given an opportunity to review games. And that's a reflection of games on their individual, how they did as a unit or a group and as a team. And for that feedback to be shared back to coaches. So that also goes back to your game modeling and your game prep, in that players need to have been included in there. So when I talk about daily and consistent, here would be another example of how you can make sure it's daily, it's consistent, it's intertwined, it permeates everything that you do. Another area that I really focus on, and I get a lot of help from my players, is just player well-being checkups and support. So I know with 36 players I have in rugby, and just the disparate types of personalities and just even time considerations, to be really honest, I want all players to feel like it's a support system, and you can use player leadership and lean on certain people. So I might actually ask somebody to look out for someone. You might not see that as leadership, but it is. It's an overt act of being a leader at that time with a friend or a teammate or a colleague. Also, same sort of thing with conflict resolution, where you need to include your team and have leadership capabilities for there. And it could be conflict within the team, between coaches, all sorts of things. Include your players in there. Simple things like travel, all the way from picking rooms to, any sort of thing that they can do with planning. Budget I have used a little bit, and nutrition in rugby, specifically sevens, we utilize quite a bit. Are there any other examples that you would have of places where you have had lots of positivity with fostering leadership, or any questions about this? Good, Spencer, or Spencer Ian?
Not a question, just an example with leading warm-ups.
Yep, leading warm-ups.
Just a couple other examples. You have had girls organize volunteer activities. Also, another one was provide games to do at practice. And another one was on our youth team, we have run practices for younger teams with senior player coaches.
Yep.
And then warm up, cool down stretches.
Awesome. Okay. So that's daily and consistent. The other thing that many of you already do this, and again, specifically with leadership, So this topic about reflection is specific with leadership. And it relates back to flattening the hierarchy as well. So players need to reflect on their specific impact on what they do and how that impacts the group. So that is also understanding how at times when they lead and when they follow. So they need to have that reflection. Coaches, you do this already, and it is the only way to get better as a coach. And it is really reflecting, and it's reflecting in all sorts of times and throughout the year and the day, in the moment in practice, when you're planning, all of those things. My players, they sometimes they grumble a little bit about it, but I do make them do lots of self-reflection. Some of this is informal. Lots of it is in writing at different key points of the year. I actually have last year I cut it down to about 13 questions about them. And so that reflection really gets back to things Dave talked about last week that are important about culture, and that your leadership then is important as players then understand their impact. So when they understand their impact, they can become leaders in monitoring their own behavior. They can become monitor and change their behavior with practice, with games, with relationships, with their mood, all of those sorts of things. Part of this flattening the hierarchy, and I use a phrase about coaching, is that many coaches and myself, I struggle with this for a long time, is I really needed to get my ego out of the way. And you need, when you start to actually use coaching as a role on the team, and you do simple little things like when you screw up, you own it publicly. It really does help leadership, because your players can see that leaders can actually own up when they make mistakes and that they get it right. And so what happens is it does build lots of the trust. There was a question last weekend, just previous, about the right time to lead. This is really hard. I can tell you my team in particular, in the last 2 years, we struggled with this quite a bit. So I said it can be dangerous. I've set the example that we can have lots of leaders on our team and have lots of people stepping up. But at times, we really have to define as a group, when is the right time to lead? And for each person, as you imagine, on an elite team like a university team, you have many players who are leaders in their own right at their older areas or other areas they've been in. And when you give them too many a chance, they have to understand that. So the role clarity and those things are really important. That takes some effort, the right time to lead. The impact of leadership. When players become leaders, they understand the difference between responsibility instead of accountability. Now, hopefully this jars some of you. Many of us use the lingo of accountability. To me, accountability, I see it as a weaker form of responsibility, where accountability is more onus on myself, making sure I get my own job done, where responsibility has a little bit bigger idea, is that I'm responsible for the team goals, and where responsibility is more important than accountability, because it doesn't matter if I just do my job right. If we lose or if we don't achieve this, if it's all the way from relationships to strategy to being in a game. So that phrase that I strongly believe, responsibility instead of accountability, or you could say responsibility in liaison with accountability. I do think your lingo and phrases about we, not I. Many coaches I listen to, they talk about my team only, and I say that as well. I really try to break that, flatten the hierarchy again. It's our team. I play a role on that team. My role at times is to be a very strong leader, but other times it's to play my role. this was a real eye-opener for me when I coached the national team. Once, about halfway through my tenure there, I was giving players on the field lots and lots of information. I was telling them how to play the game. I was getting it radioed onto the field, and I was making sure I controlled. And what I really found out that it was wrong way and it didn't help us at all, and that I needed to empower those players at that time. And once I gave them more leadership, I was way more comfortable with it. Ian, I'll stop there for a little bit.
Yeah, we have one question. What are some key aspects that you focus on when asking your players to self-reflect?
Yeah, so all the way from basically I use that phrase, it's in here, impact. So what was your impact? So did you, in practice, did you improve, were your intentions of practicing in strength training, was the impact that you improved your skill level? Was the impact that your team improved their skill level? So always about impact on themselves first, that's kind of that accountability, but always questions and related back to their impact on the team. All the way from mood to their diet, study habits, how well they're getting along with their family, how they have that life-work balance or life-school balance for us. All of those things, I ask all of those sort of elements, and basically the questions are all around what's your impact?
Okay, another one. What tools have you used to help athletes that struggle with self-reflection?
Oh, great one. So in order to do that, what I've done is actually you change the modalities, give them many opportunities in order to do it. So all the way from talking with coaches, writing, texting, talking to a teammate that I might empower with getting that reflection back from them. So you really try to, if I only ask for written reflections, it doesn't work very well. You have to look for as many different ways to get it. And again, don't be afraid to empower other players to actually help you get that reflection back from an athlete. Any other ones? That's good, Ian?
Yeah, looks like you're good to move on.
Okay. Now, so Keegan's gonna talk. Keegan, I'll push through your slides. So Keegan Brantner, Keegan, how many years have you played? 4 years of eligibility?
Yep, 4 years.
So Keegan is a Tabor, Alberta product. Very proud. She's been a captain of our team. She's been a leader on our team. She's been a Canada West All-Star. She has she was picked to the Canada U20 team, and not just picked to the team. She was named as captain. She comes by lots of leadership abilities naturally, but she's been part of our program obviously for 4 years, and I kind of wanted to get a checkup for me as well. I said I look at lots of different ways to reflect, so I've asked Keegan to help out here. Are you ready, Keegan?
You betcha.
Okay, superstar, rocket.
So first off, I wanted to thank Neil for asking me to add a player's perspective to this topic. I have been very fortunate to experience different opportunities to lead and be a leader with various teams throughout my athletic career. And with most sports teams, there are captains and assistant captains that teammates look to lead, whether by example in drills or games, staying late after practice, being punctual to practice, helping clean up equipment, changing rooms. There's also more formal ways that these designated individuals can lead, but there's also the informal ways. And thankfully, I've had coaches who see value in giving athletes the opportunity to lead. So like Neil mentioned before, he's given us quite a few ways that we can lead on our team. And one of the opportunities that I personally have had is being tasked with coming up with the line out plays for our team to use in competition. This is a set piece in rugby that I've personally had a lot of experience, knowledge, and passion towards, and being given the task to create these set pieces based on what I thought would be the most successful thing for our team showed that Neil had trust in me as not only a player, but as a leader. And after creating the lineouts, I was also given the opportunity to lead these in front of our team by teaching them the plays. I wasn't the only player on our team that was given a task like this, as other players were given back row plays to come up with penalty plays and backline plays. And this allowed many players on the team to become leaders, whether they were formal or informal. Another way I've experienced a coach giving athletes the opportunity to lead is including athletes in decision making, like Neil mentioned with gameplay. When Neil decides and the other coaches on a specific system or pattern, we as athletes are also included on this decision. We're given the opportunity to voice our concerns and make suggestions and be part of the decision making. I find this very valuable as we are a team, and so it shouldn't just be Neil or the coaches making this decision. And at the end of the day, it is the athletes who have to play the game and trust the system for it to work. I have been on teams where we haven't been given this opportunity. And what ended up happening was before the game, the team got together and we said, we don't like the system. We're not running it during the game. And the coach couldn't do anything because once the game started, we didn't run the system. And so when the coach trusts the players, we generally have more confidence in the plays and their decision. As a team, it's important that we're also a team off the field, just as we are on. And like Neil mentioned before, our team also uses leadership in our bonding activities. These can be organizing potlucks, having movie nights, team parties, game nights. Our team really loves food, so we normally revolve ours around that. But these initiatives can also be led by players for more initiatives like blood drives, bottle drives, volunteering at events, and Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And then also touching on the formal and informal. Most teams have players who are confident to lead and those who prefer to follow, though there are still ways for these players to have the opportunity to lead. Something our team has recently started doing is a team warm-up. Everyone on the team knows the warm-up, and every practice someone leads us through it. This is a simple way to give players a voice on the team. Neil also likes us to get our giggles out and run us by playing a fun game like tag at the beginning of practice. These games are always led by a different player and a great opportunity to lead in a non-stressful way. Neil has also tasked players to lead and teach drills for specific skills such as rucking or passing, asking a player to teach the skill of ruck form, for example, but giving them the freedom of the drill and the explanation to do what they wish with it. And then to the next slide, please, Neil.
Yes, ma'am.
And so this slide was kind of about the benefits of empowering athletes. So for me, I think the biggest thing is the confidence, trust, and reassurance that we get from our coaches when they trust us. So rugby is a very unique sport from a lot of other team sports in regards to our game leadership. Often in sports like hockey or basketball, when there's an opportunity to change momentum in a game, the coach is able to call a timeout or drop a penalty play for the players to run. As well as in between shifts, the player can ask for clarity or suggestions from their coach. Whereas with rugby, our only opportunity to speak with the coach is at halftime. This requires us as players to make a lot of decisions on the field on our own. I actually had a conversation with Neil earlier this year about specific decision-making on the field that I felt like I made a mistake about. And Neil clarified how he believes all of his work is done before the game and what happens in the decisions we make during the game are up to us, and that he trusts us in our decisions. This successfully works by preparing us prior to the games, but also teaching us about decision-making and scenarios that we may have to do during the games. My U20 Canada coach, Jack Ratty, gave me an exercise prior to our games. He told me to imagine different scenarios that could happen throughout the game, so if they did happen, I'd be prepared to how to handle them. I found this to be a very useful skill, as I had the time to weigh out the different options and consult him and other coaches about why I chose to make the decision I had. This provided me with the reassurance that I was capable of making the right decision, and when under pressure, these decisions would be easier to make. And then, though in many other sports there is the opportunity to speak with the coach throughout the game, there is value in having the athletes feel confident in their decision making and know they have your trust as a coach when making them, as you may run out of timeouts or run out of time to make those decisions. And then the last slide, please. And here at the University of Lethbridge, we do have a leadership academy, which we are very fortunate to have. This leadership academy gives athletes at the university the opportunity to develop and improve their leadership skills. I've been part of this academy for the past 2 years, where I've learned about leading by example, achieving a standard of excellence, skills to lead others, and how to be a role model. This program has been a great source for the Pronghorn athletics and the athletes to involve the athletes to grow as leaders and have a support staff to help us optimize our leadership potential. And that's it.
Awesome. We'll stop there, Ian, for questions for Keegan.
We do have one for Keegan. So Keegan, as a veteran leader on your team, what are your thoughts of empowering younger members to be active decision makers on your team? Is it a benefit or detriment?
I think it's beneficial because as a whole team, everyone needs to agree with our decisions. In our lineouts, for example, when I made them, if people didn't feel confident running them or we weren't successful, we obviously had to make a change. If it wasn't going to be successful for the whole team, then it wasn't going to work. In regards to making decisions, like Neil said, we do have quite a few big personalities, and sometimes that's overwhelming for younger players. And so I told them to just listen to our big voices, like specifically our captains, because it can be overwhelming when you do have a lot of decisions to be making.
Any other, Ian?
No, we should be good.
Okay. I'm actually going to touch on that question as well. And I'll give you examples. So when Keegan's talking about what we did a little bit more this year with lineouts and other things, I'll talk about this is what we did. We actually, at the beginning of the year, before we started, we went out to Ready Made for a little bit, and we actually, those not around here, it's just a local town hall, and we actually went through a game model exercise. I'm not really sure how many coaches are utilizing the game model exercise. If you want more information, please give me a call. I do really advocate for it. It's a great way to define a game. Basically what it is you have macro and micro moments of the game. So the 4 macros would be in any sport generally: defense, an attack, and then your 2 transitions from defense to attack and from attack to defense. And then you have micro moments. And so within rugby, although rugby is a simple game, there are many, many aspects of it. And so the process of what we did was we sat down with all players and we asked them basically what's their vision of how the game should be played. Like, should we play quick? Should we play wide? What are sort of aspects and all those sorts of things. And so we broke that down, and each of those groups had to lead and then understand and share with others. And once we got to that process, what I started to see even more and more was a greater understanding by all of the players of what we're doing. So younger players, although their decision making on the field might be a little bit hampered just because they're not as good of players or veteran, they understood at least, and we could, if we get to that spot. So it helped to break that frustration where coaches say they didn't know what we wanted them to do at that time, and so that really helped. We involved all the players as leaders. She said each area was kind of broken out. There was another sub leader, and they were tasked with either, depending on the player or the area. Now, it wasn't, again, I said, this isn't an abdication. It's not an abdication by the coach to say that players are going to come up with all the tactics, skills, and attributes. It's depending on the level of players that you have. Your role then becomes coordination and facilitation, but you add to the discussion. What you will find, or I found, was the answers that the players were giving about the style of play, the right way to play, tactics, plays, all of those things that I used to control, I found the players actually had largely the same ideas. And so when I said I'd mention this buy-in, when you get to this spot, it's no longer about buy-in. It's because they've invented it. Instead of me telling them how to play or how to behave and do all of those things, the players then have created that. The players have led it. They then, no need for buy-in because they live it. And that's kind of the result that I saw. And it, as Keegan said, on the field it helps them, and it helps them off the field as well. Ian, I'm actually going to stop there. That was the last slides for me. That was the overview again. Relationships, flatten the hierarchy. Oops. Flatten the hierarchy. Has to be intentional. Leadership has to be daily and consistent. And it does require lots of reflection and realignment. Daily, weekly, hourly, monthly, by season, all of those things. So Ian, I think that leaves us with about 3 to 4 minutes of questions.
Okay, another question for Keegan has come up. So Keegan, if you could answer this one for us. Building on the idea of self-reflecting and making an impact, what has been the most important thing for you in terms of personal growth?
Good question. Like Neil mentioned, we do a lot of self-reflecting. A lot of mine is often about my gameplay, but in like regards to a leadership, I would say the biggest thing is realizing that like we are a team and not putting blame on anyone, like making it very inclusive, as well as being confident in decision making. I think that was huge for myself. Yeah, I mainly focus on my game reflection, I guess.
Okay, Neil, we had a request if you could put the last slide back up, please, and then I'll follow with a question. Okay, question: to allow for technical input from your team, how do you build your learning environment so there is trust in their voices by the coaches on those concepts?
Yeah. So yeah, that does take some work. In that, if you're part of the discussion, then you're not just bullying them, you're leading towards that. And again, you also have to be, there's sometimes you might say, depending on the level or the team, you might say, no, we're just not doing that. But it is also daily and intentional. When you coach and give them feedback, largely it should be impossible for your athletes not to know how you expect the game to be played. So just by the lingo or the feedback you give athletes in practice after games, players do pick upon that. And it is sometimes a weakness that I see even locally here in my program, is that although I say I'm asking for leadership, many of them, this is their best or their only knowledge of the game. And so sometimes I find it's a little bit of inbreeding, and we actually have a lot of the same ideas. And so sometimes I like to see a little bit more out. But yeah, by daily intention, you can help build up the trust from the coach to the athlete.
Okay, Neil, do you have a suggestion when you open the floor to your team suggestions and discussions, but as a coach, you need to make the final decision and they still feel heard and not offended you didn't do what they wanted or suggested?
Yeah, so there are good times to do that. And here's the rule I use is if I don't intend to follow a group decision-making process, or if it's just for input, I tell them clearly, this is my decision. I'm curious what you're seeing. But really clear that way. And so I sleep a lot better at night when I come with that. Hope that answered that. Any more, Ian?
No, haven't seen any more come through. Do you want to just check your private and make sure it didn't go through private?
Yeah, not seeing any. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple more just came through. What do you have your loudmouths do?
Oh, yeah. Loudmouths, you really have to pick where, depending on the person. So loudmouths actually can lead things all the way from technical, and depending on the person, depending on kind of what they're loudmouth about, I try to pick a strength of theirs. So two areas, the strength of theirs and a big weakness of theirs. And the hope is that they're going to feel confident about their strength, but the weakness is that they realize they might have to rely upon somebody else. And again, that is really, again, you really have to be mindful of that, but don't be afraid of it. Try to find the best ways to get them involved, and it is different from everybody.
Okay, and then there's a follow-up question about using or not using the input from your players. And what happened in a situation above if your decision doesn't come to fruition or what you expected?
Again, so I'm really purposeful on deciding. I tell them these are things that we're going to decide, and these are things we're not going to decide. I can also say, Larry, that and I don't want to seem disingenuous, but largely I know the answer they're going to give largely before it comes. So that's another way that I can trust it is going to come the way I expected. And if it's an area that I'm really not sure and I think shouldn't have leadership, and it is just straight for me, then yeah. Even some things I can say, some things that have gone that way that I had to eat some crow or back down was I always want my athletes to stay for reading week and to practice because I love to practice. And so up until about a week before the reading week, and I was coaching a couple of years ago, the athletes, they finally came to me and they made it really clear that they didn't want to. And I could have pouted and said, yeah, we're going to, but I listened to them and I trusted them that it wouldn't hurt us. And yeah, they were sure right. It didn't hurt us. And so there was the only example I'd say would be a positive, that it didn't come the way I expected. And yeah, non-negotiables is right. You have to know those that you have. Well, I guess I want to thank a couple of people first. Ian, thanks very much for organizing all of this. And thanks to our partners. I always get the acronym wrong. ASDC. I always say ADCS. Is it ADSC?
We did have one more pop up, Neil.
Okay.
Suggestion for dealing with teammates that see leaders as favorites or jealous of what they see or presume leader means, if you haven't developed this culture yet.
Yeah, and that's the danger. So you have to be, that's why if you broaden it and you flatten your hierarchy, you're less likely to get that. And if you don't always utilize the same leaders for everything, because then it is absolutely going to appear like you're favoring certain athletes and not others. So yeah, and that they can trust that when they give up, when they're following other areas, that they'll have other areas to lead. So flatten the hierarchy, give them more examples or opportunities to lead, and that will reduce the possibility of players feeling jealous.
Okay, I think we're
Great.
I think we're good, Neil. Just a note for everyone, with Wednesday being July 1st, Canada Day, we will take next week off. And on July 8th, we will have our new men's basketball coach, Jermaine Small, presenting Developing a Season Plan. So thank you, everybody, for being part of session number 2.
Thank you.